Hi there, Michelle here from McQuaid TV. We're helping you find ways to move from functioning to flourishing by putting the latest science to the real-world test. Today I feel very privileged to be able to introduce you to Robert Quinn, whose wonderful research has been helping organisations around the world become much more positive workplaces. Robert's life mission is to inspire positive change. He's a chaired professor at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business and one of the co-founders of the Centre for Positive Organisations. He's published 18 books. His best-selling volume, Deep Change, has been used across the world, and his recent book, The Best Teacher in You, won the Ben Franklin Award, designating it the best book in education for 2015. His latest book, published in August, is The Positive Organisation, Breaking Free of Conventional Cultures, Constraints and Beliefs. He's particularly known for his work on the Competing Values Framework. It's been used by tens of thousands of managers and has been identified as one of the 40 most important frameworks in the history of business. He has 35 years of consulting experience and is known as a speaker who opens minds and inspires courage. He's a fellow of the Academy of Management and the World Business Academy. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Michelle.
I so appreciate you making the time to join us. I've just finished reading your new book, The Positive Organisation, and I wondered if, based on your research, perhaps to help get us all on the same page at the outset, you can explain to us, what does a positive organisation practically look like? What are they doing differently than what we might see in other workplaces?
Well, the simplest definition that we use is that a positive organization is a place where people flourish and exceed expectations. And the two notions are important in that the people are growing, they're highly engaged, but they're also performing at a very high level. And so it's about performance as well as engagement.
I think that's an important definition. We've talked a lot with people who listen to this TV channel or read my stuff about well-being being that definition of feeling good and functioning effectively. And so what you're describing there kind of sounds to me like the organisational equivalent, that they're feeling good but they're functioning effectively at a systems-wide level. Does that sound right?
That's exactly right. And because they're exceeding expectations, they're approaching excellence. It's not just normal performance. And a lot of people let that slip away.
So in the book, you identify that our mental maps, those kind of beliefs and assumptions that help us navigate the world, shape the culture of these workplaces. So how do these mental maps perhaps help or hinder us as we try to be more positive organisations?
Well, I talk a lot about the conventional mental map. And that conventional mental map is just a basic set of assumptions that virtually everyone makes. So people are self-interested. Resources are scarce. Conflict is natural. Those are fundamental assumptions of economics, of sociology, all the social sciences. And basically, when you make a long list of them, it's actually quite depressing. It's a very deterministic view of the world. And but that is the conventional set of assumptions. And the question I often ask managers is, if you accept this conventional set of assumptions, which all of us are taught from the time we learn to talk as young children through our experiences, then in school, and then in college, and then in the workplace, so these constantly being trained into us. And if we make those assumptions, the question is, how do you then behave as a manager? Well, the answer is you enact those assumptions. And if you enact those assumptions, what do you create? You can create conventional organizing. And so everything's a transaction. People are working for money. You have to be clever enough to design a transaction that'll get them to perform. The alternative is the positive mindset, which makes a very different set of assumptions. People are capable of pursuing the common good. People can transcend conflict. Resources can be abundant. They can be created. People can learn in real time, etc. People can spontaneously contribute. And then people say, well, which list is right? Or they'll point to the second list, the positive list, and say, well, that's Pollyanna. Now, what they mean is I don't see that very frequently. I see the conventional behavior constantly, but I don't see this very often. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Whenever we do a study of a positive organization or group or a team, that's what we find. Highly engaged people, highly engaged leaders, performing at very high levels. So both lists reflect reality, just two different realities. And the real challenge is, how do you change the transactional, conventional list into the positive list? And the answer to that question is, there's two answers. One, crisis will do it. When people are in crisis, they will collaborate, they'll do amazing things. The other is leadership. And by leadership, I don't mean a bureaucratic position. I mean someone who is able to transform mindsets and bring people to a higher level. That's what leaders do. They surface conflict, they transform the conflict into collaboration, and people perform at high levels. And so both of those views are very, very important. The positive lens is looking at the world from the far right side of the curve, from excellence. And when you scientifically apply it, you find very different things than when you look through the assumptions of the conventional lens.
So how changeable do you think these mind maps are for us? Because I think you're right. For so many of us, we've had that experience of the conventional mind map that you're describing. And so we do come to believe that that's reality and that's what the world looks like. And I certainly know many of the big organisations I've worked in, you kind of get on that treadmill of just going, well, this is how things are done and this is what's expected. And we shouldn't hope to be able to do it any differently. You talk in the book about a wonderful story about a hospital you worked in who were very much kind of in that conventional mindset. There wasn't a whole lot of positive things going on. And yet when you looked for it, everybody in the hospital was able to point towards one team that seemed to be bucking that trend. So how does one team in a workplace like that start to buck that trend when everything is kind of organised around them to reinforce that conventional mindset?
I think that's a wonderful question, and it raises some very important things. So there was a nursing unit that was different than all the other units. It was clearly the best unit in the hospital. Yet it was the same doctors, the same rules, everything was the same, but they were performing differently. And when we went in there and looked at that, there was this woman who headed up that unit who was absolutely magnificent. She engaged the people. She was a leader. She wasn't managing them. She was empowered. She was empowering. Those people adored her. In some of those units, turnover was high as 70%. In that unit, it was zero, with 200 people signed up waiting to get in. Now, we find that over and over. You go to a bank in some faraway little town, and there's this back office billing unit that has those same characteristics. It shouldn't have them, but it does. And so you go around the world and you find what some people call these bright spots. Everything traditionally says they cannot exist, they can't behave that way, and yet they keep showing up. And it's because you have a transformational leader at some middle level or upper middle level, and sometimes at the top, and all of a sudden you get an entirely different set of outcomes.
I think that's so important, because for many of us, we might be in organisations where the conventional mind map feels so entrenched that the idea of changing that right across the workplace can feel like a huge challenge to take on, and especially if you don't feel like your senior leadership team are really engaged in it. But like you, I've seen again and again in different workplaces how just one person can start to shift to that positive mental map, and when that becomes the belief that they embrace, the kind of ripple effect it begins to create around them. And like the unit you're describing, people are like attracted to those teams, wanting to get in and be part of them. And that one team can then start to sort of create this shift across an organisation. But you also talk about in the book, and I think this is so important, is that sometimes in our hunger to embrace more positive workplaces, we perhaps swing the pendulum too far to the positive without appreciating some of the value that that more negative seen traditional practices, if you like, create for attention for us. So we might get very excited about how do we inspire more intrinsic motivation, but in our rush to move towards that, lose some of the benefits that managerial control, for example, can bring. So can you tell us a little bit about what you found in terms of why balancing this tension is so important and what we can do to be more mindful, I guess, of this as we try to make these changes to our mind maps?
Yeah, that's a really important question as well. In that conventional mindset, the organization's a hierarchy, and there's a value set that drives it. Those values are not bad values, they're good values. At the heart of that hierarchy is order, efficiency, etc. We need order, we need efficiency, we need problem solving. Those things are absolutely essential. When people take the positive lens in an ideological way, they want to kill hierarchy. They want to kill, we're about innovation, not control. Likewise, when some accountant gets in charge and wants to kill the intrinsic motivation or the empowerment or whatever it is, he's doing the same thing the other one's doing. That is, they're mirror images of each other. They're just taking opposite values. When people go through a personal transformation and they go to a higher level of consciousness, suddenly they see the organization as a living system. It's dynamic. It's not dead. It's full of polarities. And a leader's job is to move towards innovation while maintaining stability. It's accomplishing tasks while engaging people. And there's lists of, I could go through 20 or 30 of those polarities. When you go too far on any polarity, if you go so hard on task focus, it becomes an oppressive sweatshop. And you alienate people, you build anger, you build conflict. If you go too far towards the people side, it becomes a country club. And people aren't confronting conflict, they're not working hard, they're underutilizing their potential. If you go too far towards the hierarchy, it becomes the frozen bureaucracy. If you go in the other direction, the adhocracy becomes the chaotic anarchy. That is, every one of the positive values has a dark shadow towards which you move if you cut off the opposite. Now, almost nobody thinks like that. We've been raised with simple theories of either or categories, and people just live in silos. And yet, in the book, I share several cases of CEOs who had to go through personal transformations in order to get to that level of understanding, and then they could move the system. We interviewed a large number of CEOs, and many of them didn't understand the fundamental notions of the positive lens, but they learned them in crisis.
And I think you talk about them as sort of becoming bilingual. And I love that idea because, again, I do think we are so conditioned to think it's either this or it's this. And I know for myself, one of the big parts of this journey has been learning to sit in that space of and to constantly challenge myself as I head to one side. Well, what would be the other side of this? And where are the benefits of being able to fuse and navigate between these pieces? I've also learned as I go into more organisations and talk about how can they become more positive, that when I can talk about the and, it puts far more leaders at ease because I'm not saying we're going to get rid of everything we've done, that old way didn't work, we're going to chuck out the conventional, but saying, you know what, we do the conventional pretty well. What if we did the positive as well and found the places where the balance between these tensions really helped us take it up to the next level? Is that your experience as well with leaders, that sometimes, as hard as it is initially for us to become more bilingual, that the idea of being bilingual between the conservative and the conventional and the positive actually sits more comfortable in the long run for us?
It's a huge issue. They never understand it coming in. I spend a lot of time on the fact that the positive lens is an inclusive lens. It's both and. When you discover the positive lens, you do not lose the old conventional lens. The conventional lens tends, for example, to be a lot about problem solving. The positive lens tends to be a lot about purpose finding. When you discover purpose finding, you don't lose problem solving. we had a very dramatic moment in my MBA class a year or so ago when it became very clear on the last day how much they had internalized the positive lens. And I had them do an exercise where they surfaced the two lenses. And then I made a point. I said, next week, 430 other MBAs are going to graduate from here. And they're going to graduate with the same underlying template or worldview that they brought in here on the first day. The Ross Business School isn't changing the underlying template at all. But the 70 of you are leaving here with two templates. And the fact that you gained the new one does not mean you lost the old one. You can still talk to those people, you can still work with those people, but you are bilingual. You have more power and more capacity. I teach that same thing to the executives, and it's at first shocking to them. But once they start to see that, they relax a great deal.
And that's definitely my experience. I started doing this kind of work in an auditing firm. So I had leaders whose reputations were built on, as you say, problem finding, pointing out the problems vigorously and loudly. So the idea that we were going to start purpose finding as well didn't sit comfortably at all initially. But when they could see that one didn't have to replace the other, and that really what we were doing was building out their toolkit, was helping them have more flexibility, more agility, that at least got them to sit in their chairs long enough to hear me and to begin exploring it, which was really helpful. I think that one of the other things I experienced trying to bring about change in that organisation, and I see it for many of the workplaces I'm working with, is just how misunderstood change also is as part of this process. Because when we're trying to become bilingual and balance these mental maps, of course, we take ourselves and our teams on this journey of transformation. And again, you have some wonderful work in this book that talks about why change isn't linear, why it's dynamic and why it's self-organising. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you found on that? Because I think that's so helpful for people who are trying to introduce these ideas in workplaces as well.
Yeah, inevitably, when you find, for example, a CEO who suddenly has one of these experiences and he discovers purpose, it's a dramatic shift. And suddenly it's about clarifying purpose, higher purpose, things people can invest in. It's about authentic conversations, making it possible for the people to tell each other the truth, which never happens in hierarchies. And once you start doing that, they can start embracing the positive good, and then you get to the concept of self-organization. It's a concept that exists everywhere in nature. We can't see it because we're so socialized to see hierarchy. But people will start to move forward on their own. They don't need to be led. Now that's absolutely impossible for people to access. But I just have experience after experience where people will specify finally the strategic purpose at the highest level. And then they'll marvel at the fact that people are stepping up and thinking of and doing things that they, the leader, could never have asked to do because they couldn't think of it. And when this does happen to people, I was working with an HR person just the past week where she now looks back on everything that happened and she just marvels. She said, I couldn't plan it. I did something and then that would loop back and that would lead to doing something else. And she said, it's just shocking to me that this just kept emerging. That's a very, very different model. And it's outside everything that people are taught at the conventional level. And so it's just essential that people start to understand those dynamics and the deep change process.
Yeah. And for me, and I'd be fascinated if you found this in your work as well, Robert, I found that when you bring people together and invite them to be part of that conversation, invite them to take up that purpose, invite them to see where they want to take it, that's when you unleash kind of that real change that can happen in such a dynamic, unstructured way. And they do, you're absolutely right, take it to places you could never have imagined. But it's having the confidence to trust the process. I think you've got a great story in the book about one team team who had trust the process printed on coins to remind them kind of what was going to go on throughout this change piece. And again, it's very different. Most CEOs will say, show me the change plan. And change plans, of course, are generally very linear and controlled, and they miss out on the potential and the possible that self-organisation brings. So how do we get comfortable kind of sitting in that change? Is there anything you recommend or have found works for the people that you're working with to embrace that more dynamic, organic nature of change?
Yes, I think that it's absolutely crucial that people have experiences. That is, I can talk at them for hours and they nod their head, and at the end of the day, they don't understand a thing because it defies, again, what they know is true, which is the whole hierarchical perspective of the world. The notion of having experiences. There's exercises, for example, in our executive courses that we do where they have to self-organize. They have the experience. It takes their breath away. It's so exciting. Then I ask them to tell me about it. They inevitably tell a hierarchical story. They say, okay, let's go back and look at the data, what happened, and whether or not this was a linear hierarchy. And they are just shocked. And that's when it finally sinks in, and the lights start going on. So they've had an experience. It challenges the assumptions, but even that's not enough. You have to then call their attention to the challenging of the assumptions. The other side of that coin is when leaders get it, and then they walk in and they say to their people, we now want to create a positive culture, the people tend to just stare at them. They have no idea what they're talking about. So they try to talk to the people, and it just doesn't work. We had a case recently where a CEO tried several times to get his direct reports to understand who he was talking about. He finally flew them to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and had them spend 2 days at a place called Zingerman's, which is a restaurant system here that's just off the scale in terms of positive organizing. Then they came to see me, and I expected to have these resistant folks. Instead, they walked in saying, when I get back, I'm going to do this. I'm going to have the truck drivers do that. And all they needed to do was to see in action the alternative, to see the positive system in action. The experience allowed their assumptions to change. That's very different than telling them things. They can't get it by telling. And so experience is really important.
One of the ways I've found you can do that experience as well is that kind of appreciative inquiry style questions. And actually, when you think back on change in the past, how did that unroll? Like when it worked, what did it look like? And of course, as soon as you start peeling that away, you realize it wasn't very linear. It was hugely dynamic, chaotic, and that, people stepped in where it wasn't expected and took it to places you couldn't have imagined when you were sitting down with a plan. And I think that can really help as well. And again, I've found that kind of model really great for bringing people together and creating change, creating ideas for change in one place, because you sort of harness that possible all in one moment. I love that one of the things you write about right at the end of the book is, although you had, as you describe, figured out how these pieces worked, how the pieces of the puzzle came together, how to explain them to somebody, how to help give them experiences. So often people were still walking away from your sessions with the best intention of doing something, but then nothing ever really happening. And I think this is true for so many of us. A lot of what we look at in positive organizational scholarship or positive psychology isn't rocket science, right? When you look at it, you go, okay, that's pretty straightforward, but the doing of it is so hard. So I know that you and your team have created a great tool to try and make the doing easier. Can you just tell us a little bit about the tool and how people watching this might be able to benefit from it?
Yes, Kim Cameron and I teach a week-long course where I teach in the morning, teach in the afternoon. It's just really polished. Executives will sit in there all week long, nodding their heads. They're on the edge of their seat. They love all the concepts. And then we would say on Friday, okay, now what are you going to go home and do differently? And they would get this panic look. One day, I had a little epiphany in an interaction with one of the executives. And what came out of that epiphany is they're scared. They know that when they go home on Monday, they're going to go back to that hierarchical environment. They know what that culture is like. And the notion of trying a positive act and getting laughed at is terrifying. When that finally sunk in, I concluded they didn't have a problem. I had a problem. I had to somehow help them fix that. So eventually what came out of that was the Positive Organization Generator, which is in the back of the book. And what that is 100 practices from real organizations where they did something very specific to become more positive. And the way it works is people look at those 100 things, rate them on a 10-point scale in terms of how interesting they are. Then they look at the top 5, 6, or 7 of them on their interest scale. And the challenge is not to imitate what it says on those pages. The challenge is to take those 5 or 6 they find most interesting and reinvent them to fit their stewardship into something that they believe in. So, okay, this company did this. What's the underlying principle? Now, how could you go home and do something? Now, what happens is they put together 4 or 5 things typically that are theirs. It's not the same thing as on the list. It's something they've reinvented, and it's something they believe they can do, so they've got the courage. And one of the criteria for the idea they have to come up with is something you don't need to ask permission to do. So when they do come up with their lists of things, they're pretty excited because it's within their set of strengths, it's within their sensibilities, and then they go home and they try things. And even then, it doesn't guarantee it's going to work. You try it, you get some feedback, you massage it, and you learn your way into making it successful. But we've had just wonderful success with that tool in terms of helping people now own something they really want to do.
I think that's so important on a number of fronts. And of course, people can try this online, and we'll give them the website at the end of today to go and have a play with it if they want. When I went into the tool, it was great because it helped me assess a bit between those positive and negative polarities and where my organisation was. So it was great to give me a bit of a picture of sort of where things sat. But I love the intelligence around, here's 100 interventions that we found can be helpful, but what matters in your situation and for the outcomes you're trying to achieve, and what's going to best suit your strengths, and what are you motivated and excited to try. And I think that's often a piece of the puzzle to date that we've kind of overlooked as positive organisational scholarship has grown, and again, people with the best intention and appetite to go out and make a difference pull off interventions like, best possible future self, if you like, or other things, and then apply it and wonder then why it didn't work in their world. And it doesn't for all sorts of good reasons if you haven't thought about situation and outcome and the strengths that you bring. And I love that idea that we do need to keep playing with them, that often it's not a slam dunk, but there are ideas and gems in there that could work and take us forward. So how do you build on the bits that are working and lose the bits that aren't, rather than chucking the whole lot in the too hard basket and not going forward? So I think the way the tool's designed is such an intelligent way to help us navigate this journey towards a positive organisation more effectively. So I highly recommend anyone listening to go and have a play with it. Is there one thing that you've seen an organisation do that really stood out for you as kind of a favourite positive intervention you think most workplaces should consider?
Well, it's really a wide-ranging set. I think of a man that was here just a couple of weeks ago. We had done a week with his company and a group of them, and then they came back several months later. And so they had put their plan in place and so forth, and then they went to work. So we had them report out. And he told, I thought, the most brilliant story. He said, I put my plan together, but even then I went home and sat on it. And he said, I kept asking, how can I take that entire week and reduce it to one act that will make a big difference? And so he took him another 2 weeks of thought to come up with that. And I thought that question was great. And his answer, what he came up with, is he walked into his office one day, and on his whiteboard he wrote, what result do you want to create? When his first direct report came in to ask about something, instead of answering, he pointed at the whiteboard. And the guy said, "What's that?" He just pointed again. He refused to talk. So the guy left in confusion, came back in later, but now he had an answer to the question, what result he wanted to create. When the next direct report came in, he just repeated the process. He said at the end of 2 weeks, our entire unit was far more purpose directed than I ever imagined they could be. Now, I love that story. Here's a man who disciplined himself with his own question, how can I reduce the entire week to one action? He came up with something that fit him. He went outside the box, did uncomfortable things because he believed in it, and it transformed the culture. You know, he had a colleague that reported a few minutes later a change on flex time, where he did a very similar thing on inquiry and had these blue-collar people invent their own flex time system. And all he did was ask questions. The test group of 30 people came out with a system that worked very well. They had one woman who eliminated all her childcare costs through the system. And now they're taking it to all 350 people. Same basic principle. And so there are hundreds of stories like that we've, and each one is different. But it just excites me when those people come back and they've owned it and they've gone out and practiced positive deviance.
I think that's fantastic.
They make it work.
Yeah, and I love that question. What result do you want to create? I'm going to try that with some of my clients over the next few days. Robert, thank you so much for your time today.
You are a brilliant interviewer.
Well, it's easy when you've got good material to work with. And thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for watching. If you're looking for more on Robert's wonderful work, then head on over to thepositiveorganisation.wordpress.com or Robert's own site at robin-quinn.com, where you can sign up for his wonderful blog, which provides lots of great insights into the research on positive organisational scholarship and ways you can apply it in workplaces. You'll also be able to access the Positive Organisation Generator tool through these sites. And of course, if you're looking for other tested, practical ways you can move from functioning to flourishing at work, then be sure to stop by michellmcquaid.com. Leave your name and email address so you can hear all our news first. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching Shell McQuaid TV. Remember, you are good enough, so don't be afraid to let your strength shine. Until next time, take care.